March 6th, 1944, 23,000 feet over southern Germany. The air is thin, the sky looks calm, and that's usually when people die. The bomber is already deep in enemy airspace. Engines steady, crew quiet. No one is joking anymore. And then the call comes in sharp and flat like it always does. Fighters. 6 o'clock high, 12 of them. They're not attacking yet. That's the dangerous part. They're forming up, sliding into position, taking their time. German pilots were good at that. They didn't rush. They organized first. Then they killed you. Every tail gunner in the 8th Air Force knew the drill. You waited. You conserved ammunition. You let them commit. You fired when they entered the box. That was the rule. That was survival. And statistically, it worked terribly. From the tail position, you could see everything coming, which meant you had just enough time to understand how little control you actually had. But on this mission, something different happens. Before the fighters dive, before they roll into attack formation, before they do what everyone expects them to do, the tail guns open up. Not a warning burst, not a careful squeeze, full fire at 2,000 yards. It's insane. At that range, you're not supposed to hit anything. The tracers arc through empty sky, bright and dramatic, and on paper completely pointless. Someone on board probably thinks, great. Our tail gunner has finally lost his mind. But the fighters react. They don't dive. They don't hold formation. They scatter. One breaks right. Another hesitates. The timing collapses. The clean geometry of the attack dissolves into something messy and uncertain. And suddenly, the hunters are reacting instead of planning. That's the moment most people miss. Not the kills, not the explosions, the hesitation. In less than 4 minutes, the attack that was supposed to be textbook turns into chaos. Fighters peel away early, runs abort. The rhythm is gone. No one on that bomber celebrates. There's no cheering. Just a strange silence, broken by the steady vibration of engines and the realization that something fundamental just shifted. This wasn't bravery. It wasn't luck. And it definitely wasn't standard procedure. It was a question thrown directly at the enemy. What happens if the defender doesn't wait? What happens if the most vulnerable position on the aircraft decides to act first? For 4 minutes over Germany, someone answered that question. And air combat was never quite the same again. To understand why what happened over Germany mattered, you have to understand the aircraft first. The bomber everyone romanticizes, the flying fortress. The B-17 looked invincible from the outside, bristling with guns, steel everywhere, engines roaring like confidence itself. But inside, the illusion faded quickly. A bomber formation was designed around one idea: mutual protection. Each aircraft covered the blind spots of the others. Overlapping fire, disciplined spacing, predictable movement. It looked impressive on diagrams. In real combat, it depended on everyone surviving long enough to help each other. And at the very back of that formation sat the tail gunner. No cover behind him. No friendly aircraft overlapping his fire. Just empty sky and whatever was coming fast from 6 o'clock. He saw the attack forming before anyone else, which sounded useful until you realized it meant he was also the first one targeted. German fighters knew this. They didn't guess. They studied it. The stern approach gave them speed, stability, and a clean shot. It also forced the tail gunner into a terrible position. Fire too early and you wasted ammunition. Fire too late and you died. So doctrine stepped in calm and reasonable, the way doctrine always does. Wait. Let them commit. Conserve your rounds. Track the lead aircraft. Everything about it was designed to sound smart in a classroom and survivable on paper. In practice, it turned the tail gunner into a professional reactor. He didn't decide when the fight started. The enemy did. He didn't control distance. The enemy did. His job wasn't to dominate the engagement. It was to endure it. That mindset shaped everything. Gunners weren't trained to win fights. They were trained to get through them. Success wasn't measured in disrupted attacks, but in still being alive when the mission ended. The numbers told the rest of the story. Tail gunners had the highest casualty rates in bomber crews. Everyone knew it. Crews joked about it the way people joke about bad luck because admitting fear out loud felt worse. If you sat in that position long enough, survival became the goal. Not initiative, not control, just making it back with the aircraft still flying. And that's the quiet flaw buried in every defensive doctrine of the time. They all assumed the enemy owned the tempo. The Germans attacked when they wanted how they wanted from angles they chose. The defenders responded, absorbed, hoped. The system wasn't built for someone who refused that bargain. It wasn't built for someone who looked at the most dangerous seat in the aircraft and thought maybe waiting is the problem. From the tail, you had the worst odds and the clearest view. You could see the fighters assembling. You could see the moment before violence became inevitable. The question no one asked was simple. 1. What if you acted before that moment? Michael Donovan didn't arrive at war thinking like a soldier. He arrived thinking like someone who had learned very early that waiting was a mistake. He grew up in South Boston, a place where arguments rarely stayed verbal, and hesitation usually came with consequences. The rules were simple. If trouble was coming, you didn't stand still and hope it passed. You acted first, or you paid for it. Donovan learned that lesson long before anyone handed him a uniform. By the time he reached gunnery school, instructors noticed the problem immediately. He was too aggressive, too quick to fire, too willing to expose himself to return fire. On paper, these were flaws, red flags, things to be corrected. Training was built around discipline and restraint. Control your bursts. Track carefully. Don't get excited. Don't let adrenaline make decisions for you. Donovan understood the instructions. He just didn't agree with the assumptions behind them. Waiting to him wasn't discipline. It was surrendering control. In practice drills, while other trainees followed the script, Donovan kept breaking it. He fired sooner. He moved faster. He treated every approaching target as something that had to be disrupted, not politely allowed to complete its plan. Instructors corrected him constantly. Slow down. Be patient. Let the enemy come to you. He listened. He nodded. And then, when the exercise started, he went back to doing what felt right. The evaluations reflected that contradiction. His accuracy scores were good, not exceptional. His reaction times, however, were unmatched. He saw targets sooner, acquired them faster, made decisions before others had finished thinking. He didn't graduate at the top of the class. He graduated near it. Not because he followed doctrine perfectly, but because speed mattered more than elegance when things went wrong. To the system, Donovan was a problem child, not dangerous enough to fail, not obedient enough to trust completely. To Donovan, the system itself was the problem. Every lesson assumed the same thing. That combat was something you absorbed. That survival came from minimizing exposure. That initiative belonged to whoever attacked first. That might have worked for someone sitting behind layers of armor and overlapping guns. It made less sense when your entire job involved staring straight into the path of incoming fire. From the tail position, you didn't have the luxury of patience. You had seconds, not minutes. Waiting didn't feel calm. It felt passive. And passivity in Donovan's experience was how people got hurt. So when he finally took his place in a bomber crew, he didn't bring a new weapon or special training. He brought a mindset that didn't fit the seat he was assigned. He wasn't looking to be brave. He wasn't chasing heroics. He simply refused to sit still and let someone else decide when violence began. That refusal, born long before the war, was about to collide with a doctrine built entirely on waiting. The first time Donovan tried it, no one called it a doctrine. They called it a mistake that hadn't killed them yet. The mission was routine by the standards of early 1944. Long flight, steady formation, the usual tension hanging in the air like static. When the German fighters appeared off the tail, they did what they always did. They formed up. Clean lines, calm patience, professionals preparing to do their work. Everyone waited for the moment they had been trained for. Donovan didn't. Before the fighters rolled into their dive, before they tightened spacing and committed, his guns came alive. Short bursts at extreme range, too far to kill, too early to make sense. The tracers stretched out into empty sky, bright and theatrical, like he was trying to scare clouds. Someone on the crew muttered something about wasted ammunition. And at first it looked like they were right. No explosions, no smoking wrecks, just fighters adjusting, weaving slightly, trying to understand what this bomber was doing differently. Then the adjustment turned into hesitation. One aircraft broke position, another followed. The neat geometry dissolved into something sloppy. The attack never fully formed. They broke off early, not damaged, just unsettled. The bomber flew on untouched. No holes, no screams over the intercom, just confusion. Back on the ground, the reaction was immediate. "You burned through a lot of ammo," the crew chief said. "Too much for nothing." Donovan didn't argue. He just pointed out the obvious. They didn't get hit. That wasn't convincing. One mission proved nothing. Anyone could get lucky once. So the next mission he pushed further. When the fighters appeared again, he waited just long enough to confirm the pattern. Same approach. Same lead aircraft drawing attention. Same wingmen holding formation, trusting the rhythm. That trust was the weak point. This time, Donovan didn't aim at the lead fighter. He aimed just off it at the second aircraft, the one flying predictably, assuming the first would take the fire. The burst was short, precise, and this time it hit. The wingman shattered. The lead fighter suddenly had no one beside him, no reference point, no rhythm. He broke away instinctively. The rest followed. The attack collapsed faster than the first time. On the ride home, the crew didn't joke about wasted ammunition anymore. They counted rounds. They checked the tail. They replayed what they'd seen. Donovan wasn't celebrating. He wasn't tallying kills. He was watching reactions, timing, how quickly confidence turned into caution. That night, he thought about it. Not in dramatic terms, just in simple ones. Fighters attacked in waves. Waves required order. Order required calm. And calm disappeared the moment someone forced you to react too early. You didn't have to destroy the enemy. You just had to interrupt them. The idea was dangerous. It burned ammunition. It exposed the gunner. It went against everything written in manuals. And it only worked if the enemy still believed in their plan, which raised an uncomfortable question. What happens when they stop believing? What happens when the numbers get bigger, the formations thicker, and there's no margin left for experiments? Donovan didn't have the answer yet, but the tests were promising, and the next mission wouldn't be a test. The third time the fighters came in, it wasn't cautious anymore. It was deliberate. They didn't dive straight away. They assembled first farther out than before, holding altitude spacing, tight timing clean. This wasn't hesitation. This was correction. The enemy had learned. From the tail, Donovan watched the geometry come together. He could almost see the plan forming in the sky. If they finished organizing, the attack would be clean, coordinated, lethal. So he didn't let them finish. At extreme range, the guns spoke again. Not spraying wildly, not hoping for miracles. Short, purposeful bursts into the space where order was forming. The goal wasn't destruction, it was disruption. Tracers cut across the invisible lines holding the formation together. The reaction was immediate. One fighter slid out of position, another overcorrected. The timing cracked. The dive came late and uneven. What should have been a single synchronized strike arrived in pieces. The bomber shuddered as rounds passed close, but nothing struck home. The first wave broke without committing fully. Donovan reloaded, checked his remaining ammunition, and did the math without saying it out loud. He didn't have enough to play this game forever. They came back differently the second time. Two groups now splitting angles trying to stretch his attention. A classic answer to aggressive defense. Force the gunner to choose. Divide fire. Create gaps. Donovan chose. He ignored one side completely and locked onto the group coming straight down the tail. It wasn't heroic. It was practical. He trusted the other gunners to handle their sector. Dividing focus here would kill everyone. He fired into the lead aircraft. It took hits and disintegrated. The next fighter inherited leadership for exactly 1 second before the guns shifted and fired again. Another broke apart. The formation unraveled faster than logic said it should. Pilots pulled away instinctively, not because the threat was unbeatable, but because it was immediate and focused. No one wants to fly into a stream of fire aimed with intent. The radio crackled with voices trying to sound calm. Donovan barely heard them. He was counting seconds, not kills. The ammunition was disappearing faster now. Every burst mattered. Every decision closed one door and opened another. When the fighters returned again, the numbers were higher, the angles uglier. This time they attacked from multiple directions at once. That was the moment where doctrine said, "You died." Donovan did the opposite. He narrowed his world to a single approach, straight behind, direct, the most dangerous line. He let everything else go. The fighters came in fast. The closing speed erased hesitation. He waited longer now, letting them fill the sights, letting physics do some of the work for him. When he fired, it was sustained, controlled, and ruthless. One aircraft vanished, then another. The survivors broke away hard, not regrouping, not planning another run. They fled the line of fire like it was alive. He reloaded again. The belts were nearly empty. When the next wave formed larger than before, the math finally stopped working. He didn't have enough rounds to stop all of them. He knew it. They probably knew it too. So he changed the equation. He opened fire early, long before effective range, not to hit anything, but to announce presence, to remind them what happened to the last group, to force memory into the cockpit of every approaching fighter. One aircraft took a hit by chance. Another clipped a wing while maneuvering. The formation dissolved into avoidance instead of attack. And then the guns went dry. No dramatic click. Just silence where recoil should have been. Donovan didn't move the barrels away. He kept tracking. Smooth, confident, as if the weapons were still alive, as if he could fire again at any second. The fighters hesitated. They had seen what happened before. They had learned that this tail gunner didn't wait. They had learned that approaching him carried a cost that wasn't always calculable. One pilot broke first, then another. The rest followed, peeling away, choosing distance over certainty. The bomber flew on. They didn't retreat because they were beaten. They retreated because they weren't sure anymore. And uncertainty in combat is often enough. Donovan sat back, hands steady, eyes, forward, the most dangerous position on the aircraft, suddenly quiet. He hadn't defended the bomber by waiting. He defended it by refusing to give the enemy time to feel safe. After the engines wound down and the bomber rolled to a stop, the adrenaline didn't disappear. It just had nowhere left to go. Ground crews counted holes. Crew chiefs counted ammunition boxes and came up empty. Pilots replayed moments in their heads that didn't fit the manuals they had memorized. Someone eventually asked the obvious question quietly, the way dangerous questions are usually asked. Was that? A loud command didn't rush to celebrate. They rarely do. The first reaction was concern. That much ammunition gone from a single position raised eyebrows. Aggressive fire sounded impressive until someone imagined the same behavior from the wrong gunner on the wrong day at the wrong moment. So they checked. They pulled mission reports. compared damage, looked at aborted attack runs. Not headlines, not hero stories, just patterns. What they saw wasn't magic. It was messy. It worked sometimes. Other times it didn't. But something consistent showed up in the margins. Enemy fighters were breaking earlier. Not all was destroyed, often untouched, but interrupted, disorganized, forced to react instead of execute. The effect wasn't measured in kills. It was measured in time. Seconds bought, attacks spoiled, bombers slipping through windows that hadn't existed before. That didn't make everyone comfortable. Traditional instructors called it reckless, wasteful. They worried about ammunition, about discipline, about what happened when aggression met panic instead of control. They were right to worry. This wasn't a trick anyone could copy safely. It demanded judgment, timing, a certain temperament. Some gunners tried to imitate it and failed spectacularly. They fired too much too fast without purpose. Aggression without focus didn't disrupt the enemy. It just burned resources. That became the line no one could ignore. The idea wasn't to attack blindly. It was to seize initiative at the right moment, to concentrate fire where it mattered, to understand that combat wasn't only mechanical, it was psychological. Those three ideas began to appear in briefings, then in training notes, then quietly in doctrine. Not as commandments, as guidance, as options, as tools to be used carefully. The numbers that followed were cautious deliberately so. Estimates, trends, comparisons across units, and months, not promises. There was no single cause, no miracle solution. Fighter escorts improved, tactics evolved. But in formations where aggressive disruption was used correctly, attack completion rates declined. Losses eased slightly. Survivability edged upward. Not dramatically. Reliably. That mattered. The story stopped being about one gunner. It became about how systems adapt, how doctrine changes when reality refuses to cooperate with theory. The idea survived not because it was dramatic, but because it fit what crews were seeing. Aggression, when controlled, created hesitation. Focus prevented chaos. Psychology shaped outcomes before bullets ever landed. No statues were built. No manuals rewritten overnight. Just a quiet shift in how people thought about defense. The bomber didn't have to wait anymore. And that was a dangerous idea. Long after the engines went quiet and the war moved into textbooks, the lesson didn't fade. It didn't sit comfortably in medals or parade speeches. It lingered where doctrines are supposed to be stable and unquestioned. Military systems, like permanence, they prefer rules that feel solid, predictable, safe. Once a procedure works often enough, it hardens into habit. And habits over time start calling themselves wisdom. Before that moment in the sky, defense meant endurance. You waited. You absorbed pressure. You trusted that armor formation or distance would protect you long enough for help to arrive. It wasn't cowardice, it was logic. And for a while, it made sense. But waiting hands something valuable to the enemy. It hands over time. Time to organize. Time to coordinate. Time to feel confident that their plan will unfold exactly as rehearsed. And confidence in combat is often the most dangerous weapon on the field. What changed wasn't a gun or an aircraft. It wasn't a revolutionary technology. It was a shift in who controlled the tempo of the encounter. The moment the defender acted first, the entire equation changed. Not because the defender became stronger, but because the attacker became uncertain. That idea survived the war because it proved useful, not because it sounded heroic. It moved quietly into training programs and planning documents. Pilots learned that disruption mattered as much as accuracy. Naval officers learned that forcing early reactions could collapse complex attacks. Even modern automated defense systems are designed around the same principle. Engage early enough to break coordination, not to annihilate the threat, just to deny it confidence. This is not a celebration of violence. If anything, it's a warning against passivity. There is a difference between restraint and waiting politely for harm to arrive. One is a choice. The other is surrender disguised as patience. The tail gunner's position was never meant to shape history. It was a place of exposure, isolation, and bad odds. It existed to survive, not to innovate. And yet from that most vulnerable seat, a quiet truth emerged. Defense does not require stillness. Vulnerability does not require silence. Sometimes the safest moment to act is before the rules say you're allowed to. That lesson didn't stay confined to war. It appears everywhere systems face pressure. In crises where everyone sees the problem forming and no one wants to be first to move. In organizations where procedures are followed long after they stop working. In moments where the cost of waiting is invisible until it's irreversible. Action always carries risk. That much is obvious. Acting too early, too aggressively, or without judgment can be catastrophic. But waiting carries risk as well. It just hides it behind comfort and routine. History rarely remembers the people who waited correctly. It remembers those who recognized when the rhythm was wrong and dared to change it. So when danger is still assembling, when it hasn't fully revealed itself yet, when everyone around you insists that patience is wisdom, it's worth asking a harder question. Are you choosing restraint, or are you choosing to give someone else control of the moment?